stamped video Germany. As with any project like this, there always ends up with a lot of small details that need resolving. First and foremost today, I'm planning to get these new power steering lines fitted up, and I've got quite a funny story to tell you about the previous ones which are now off the car. If I make good time on that, I'm also planning to get the heater matrix hoses rigged up and also look at fitting the brown temp sensor so I have a coolant temperature reading on the E30 dash. Basically, everything that needs to be underneath the manifold so I can get on with fitting that next, I want to resolve today. Since the previous video, I have got a couple of jobs done, including refitting the clutch reservoir and getting it bled up, and the pedal feels good now. Also, I've put stainless exhaust clamps on all of the slip joints on my BM Conversions manifold and my Scorpion system. And I've even found time to adjust the back box hangers for that massive Scorpion muffler. And now it's got a bit of room to move and it doesn't clash with the wheel well, so I'm really happy with how that's come together. I think the exhaust is actually officially done. I'll run a few clips now just so you can see the result with the exhaust, and also the clutch went well overall. Perfect. So now I've brought you up to speed on the exhaust and the clutch, I can talk to you about these old power steering lines, and I've had quite a carry on with them actually. Might give you a bit of a laugh this, although I wasn't laughing at the time. If you can remember back to when I fitted this Z3 steering rack, I used the original E30 lines and I heated them up and bent them with the vise. This one, fed through the tabs on the subframe, and the other one routed around the back of the subframe. And it was pretty good. I was quite pleased with it at the time. I realised soon after that I'd actually made a serious oversight, and one that got pointed out to me in the comments on that video. Now the car is an M52 swap, I can no longer use this E30 power steering pump, and instead I need to use the M52 pump, which is actually on the engine now. Annoyingly, this uses different line connections. So my E30 feed line had an M14 banjo fitting that was too small to use on the M16 on the E36 pump. And my return line had a banjo fitting here when it really needed to be a Jubilee clip type. After realising that, I thought, no big deal. I'll get away with fitting an adapter just like this one for the banjo fitting and cut the other banjo off to make it push fit with the Jubilee. But first, I wanted to remove and refinish the lines as they had some surface rust, and this is where it started to all go wrong for me. I noticed that the line I routed through the subframe tabs, wedged between the rack and the subframe, was so tight in there, and it was definitely going to be rubbing and eventually rubbing through and causing a big problem. So I decided I wanted to reroute the line above the tabs, in between the sump and the subframe, instead of through the tabs. In trying to take the line off, I realised something really stupid. It's actually stuck behind the steering rack, thanks to how the sump plug is positioned on my custom E34 sump. Have a look at this. And that's when I also found out that I can't even remove the sump plug because the plug is longer than the space there is to unscrew it in, which is an absolutely ridiculous problem to have, and one I'll unfortunately need to come back to. I did eventually get the line out though, through brute force and ignorance, and now it's out, I have concluded that there's no way I can rebend the line because it's just on the cusp of kinking already. Defeated, I decided to shoot another SOS message to Dan at BM Conversions, and it turns out these power steering lines are actually another one of his specialities. He even went to the effort to do me a bespoke routing to work around that absolutely stupidly placed sump plug. They look really great, these. I can't wait to get them fit, to be honest. Let's get on with that now. that's the power steering system fully fitted back up now, including the reservoir. And the BM conversions lines turned out to be an absolutely perfect fit. I would have saved myself a massive amount of frustration if I'd have just bit the bullet and gone for those in the first place. I'll make sure I link to the lines in the description so you can click through and check those out for yourself. I can't really bleed up the power steering system until the car runs and the belt spins the pulley on the power steering pump. But it's never good to run a pump dry. So what I am going to do is I'm going to top this off and then bleed it when I've got the car to run. But at least on first startup, the pump will have some fluid to push around. So I've picked up some Dexron 3 ATF, which I believe to be standard fill for E36 power steering systems. So I suppose I'll get some of it poured in, and then we can move on to looking at the brown temp sensor. Right, so it's taken about half a litre. I'm expecting to put around another full litre in it when the fluid's circulating. But that's the power steering done for today. So now we can turn our attention to the brown temp sensor. And I'll run you through what's involved with that. So what you're looking at here is the black temp sensor, which is installed into the head of the M52. This is the standard sensor, probably the original one. And it's installed and plugged in at the moment. It's a 4-pin sensor. Now we need to keep this installed because it actually tells the ECU what the coolant temperature is. Unfortunately, however, this black temp sensor does not send a reading that can be correctly interpreted by the E30's cluster. So if you run with this alone, you won't have a coolant reading at all on the E30's dash, which definitely won't do in my opinion. That's something I definitely want to be able to monitor. So to solve that, what we need to do is install an additional temp sensor. And actually, we're going to install the one that was originally fitted to this E30 that's currently fitted to the M40 engine that's sat in the corner. That is a brown temp sensor and it's a single pin. So I'm going to install that and run it in parallel with this black temp sensor, and that should solve our problems. I'll go into the details on how it wires up, etc. shortly, but first things first, let's harvest the brown temp sensor from the M40. It should be under the intake. There it is, right in front of me. So this is the one we're looking for. It's the single pin one, not to be confused with the blue one, which is 2 pins. We don't need that. So it's a 19. Let's just whip this one out. Right, so this is the brown temp sensor I've just harvested from the M40. As you can see, it is single pin. Interestingly, the brown seems to be a bit pale, so it's probably the original one. And it is stamped VDO Germany, so almost definitely the original one from 1990. It was working, so I am very confident that it's going to be just fine. So what I need to do now is install it into the M52 head. And this is where yours might differ a little bit from mine. I will cover that in just a moment. Well, that was almost too easy. The bad news though is it's probably not going to be that easy for you. From my understanding, it's very unusual for an M52 to be drilled for 3 ports like this one is. The first one is the throttle body heater. Second one is obviously the brown temp sensor that I just put in, and previously it was just blanked with a bolt for some reason. The third one, the black temp sensor that we talked about earlier. As far as I know, this central port is mostly undrilled, untapped. I suspect the only reason mine was drilled and tapped was because this M52 was actually in an E30 swap before, so it probably had a brown temp sensor in it originally, well, before I got it. And for whatever reason, the person that sold the engine took it out to keep it, no idea why, but at least they put a blanking bolt in. If you've not been so lucky as for somebody to have already done this job for you, you've got three options here. Option 1 is to drill and tap this to M14 1.5. Option 2 is to remove the throttle body heater and use that hole, but this won't be as easy as that because the hole is actually M12, so too small. You could drill and tap it to M14, or you could rethread a brown sensor to M12, or buy a custom one, which I believe are already available done for you. Option 3 is to find somewhere else for the brown temp sensor. Not uncommon to see people putting them in an adapter between the top rad hose and the thermostat housing. So now I've talked about that, let's talk about wiring in this brown temp sensor. The wiring for this should be quite simple. Bear in mind we're talking about one wire here. According to the table from my recent wiring video, the wire in question for this temp sender is actually brown and violet. So I need to trace that wire. Right, it hasn't taken me long to find it. I found brown and violet into the black temp sensor on this end. It goes all the way up to the C101 plug into pin 4. You can see it connected there to the M52 harness. So at some point along this wire, I need to splice in my connection to the brown temp sensor, and that should give me a coolant temp reading on the dash. I want to do this in quite a neat way, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to harvest the original plug from the M40's engine loom, and we will splice that in somewhere and hopefully we'll get an OE finish. So my plan is to cut the conduit about here and connect this in, having cut the brown and violet wire from around here, so it's hidden within the conduit. And then with that connected in around there, hopefully it'll be a job done. Right, well that's a job done. Doesn't look quite as OE as I was hoping. It was pretty fiddly in the end, which is my excuse. But nevertheless, that's a job done now, and we can move on to looking at the coolant lines. The first thing I've decided regarding the coolant lines is that I'm going to actually cap off the throttle body heater, which are these two ports here. So I've got the throttle body, and it's going to end up roughly in this position. And the original lines, I think they go this way around, would have been on it something like this, connecting in to the throttle body. Now I've decided that I'm going to cap them off and effectively delete this for now. I'm not going to do it in the most permanent way, I'm just going to cap them because that'll enable me to change my mind later if I decide to. To be honest, I'm not really sure why BMW had coolant lines heating up the throttle body. I suspect it's for cold climates, they don't want these icing up obviously. But it does seem a little bit counterproductive that you'd heat your intake air, because surely you'd want the densest, coldest air possible. So for now, I'm going to put these aside and I'm just going to cap these off. now these are bodged up, I'm going to turn my attention to looking at the heater matrix hoses, which are at the back of the engine here. I've got two to connect up. One which is between the head of the M52 into the inlet for the heater matrix. I'm going to be using this pipe here, which is a reasonable fit. This is actually a pipe I harvested off the M40 engine. It's actually the one that comes off the thermostat housing. Part number is 64211381191. And for the outlet, which connects to the spider pipe here, I'm going to be using this hose, something like this. This is a hose that actually came with the M52 and it's part number 64211703844. Now, they're not a perfect fit, but then again, nothing was going to be because this is a custom application for it. They're not kinked and they don't look like they're threatening to kink, so I'm fairly happy with how they're looking. However, there is one problem, and it's at this end here. The inlet pipe, the one I harvested from the M40, this is the thermostat end on the M40, and this has a bulge like a step up, which steps it up to around 27mm on this end. And the port on the M52's head that it's attaching to is 25mm, so 2mm difference. So it's loose, to be frank. You'd think that was game over, but also the pipe seems slightly too long. So what I'm planning to do is to chop most of this bulge stepped up end off and then warm it up a bit and get it on, and it should go on really nice and snug. So that's what I'm going to try now. Alright, well I'm really pleased with that, to be honest. I can't see why this isn't a good permanent solution, but I guess we'll find out down the road. There's quite a few other cooling system components to look at yet, but until I've got a radiator mounted in there, there's just no point in seeing what goes where really, because things are going to need to change. I will make a detailed video about the cooling setup for an M52 and an E30 down the line once I've figured it all out myself, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on that. But as far as I'm concerned, we should be able to start and run this engine briefly without needing to hook it all up and fill it with coolant. So not having a rad in isn't going to stop us from seeing if it'll actually start and run, so that's my current focus. Right, next thing to do is to chuck these fuel lines back on, which should hopefully be a really quick job. We've got the feed line with the fuel filtering line, a breather and a return line, and they connect up down there and the filter just mounts here. Hopefully I'll figure out which one's which, but I'm not currently certain which one's the return and which one's the feed, and I'm not sure which is which with the hard lines either, so I'll probably have to look back at my own video to work out which one goes where. But let's get these stuck on now. For those of you wanting to know, I did work out which one was which. The one at the bottom is the breather line, the one in the middle is the feed line that goes to the filter, and the one at the top is the return line, and the black one, small one there, is just a brake line. Now, as this E30 is an M52 swap, obviously, it's not going to be as simple as using the original E30 fuel lines. This is the fuel rail that belongs to the M52. And it'll be connected up somewhere around here, affixed to the manifold when it's on, with the injectors poking out of it into the intake runners. And as you can see, the previous guy did me a favour by leaving the lines on and just chopping them. So my plan is, and I'm not sure how long they need to be, so I'm going to leave them at full length for now, but my plan is to connect these to these using these handy brass couplers, and then they should connect up, be at the right length, and not leak, hopefully. So I have a feeling that's going to work. We'll find out when we actually fit the manifold. So the last thing I want to do today is readdress the wiring. Now, if you haven't watched the wiring video I did previously, which got me to this point of having spliced the M52's wiring into the C101 plug, then I urge you to go back and have a look at that. And you can see the table, the pinout table I've used to work out which one connects to which, so that could be useful. We actually left off on that wiring video showing the engine cranking on the starter motor using the key, which is a really good sign. But in the comments on the video I did receive some sound advice which I will share on with you now. For starters, thanks to a guy called Jim M, he pointed out that I'm using the wrong type of flux with my solder stick connectors that you can see here. And apparently they'll weaken over time. I've used plumber's flux when I should have used electrician's flux. So they seem solid now, but maybe they won't be a forever thing. However, I am planning to come back and actually repin this C101 plug once I'm certain that this is all correct and I have a running car. So that shouldn't be an issue in the future. Secondly, a big thank you to a guy called Felix who left me a detailed comment about the wiring I'd done. He pointed out a couple of things I should check and potential changes I should make. The main one being to do with this green wire. One of these two wires is EWS and the other one is ignition. I couldn't work out which one was which, so I opted to connect both into the green wire on the C101 side. He said that I shouldn't leave both of these connected up to the green wire because I could potentially damage the ECU by having the EWS wire connected when it should be isolated. However, there is a way to use the ECU plug to try and find continuity to work out which one is the EWS so I can actually disconnect it permanently. So that's what I'm going to do now. So I've unhooked the ECU and I've found pin 18 on the ECU connector, which should be the EWS pin. I've fed this little black wire into there just because my multimeter won't reach between the C101 and this. So I'm going to use the end of this end of the black wire to check for continuity between pin 18 on here and the green wire on the C101 plug. Let's go and have a look now. So I have now just confirmed that one of these two green wires does in fact go to pin 18 to the ECU. So that means that one of them is definitely the EWS. The problem is I still don't know which one it is. So my thought now is cut one of them and give myself a 50-50 chance of cutting the correct one. And I'll know it's the correct one because the continuity between here and the ECU will be broken. High stakes. I'm going to have to turn that heater down. Right, moment of truth here. Nothing. I've cut the right one. Just to be certain, let's check on the one I've cut. Brilliant. Great result. In Felix's comment, he also mentioned about this black with green wire here that was just a ripped off connection, didn't know where it went to. He told me that it actually connects to the starter solenoid, and having looked at a few pictures online, it seems like it connects to this top one here. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little end on this, connect it in, and call it a job done. Now, even with this disconnected, the car was cranking on the key. So I suspect it potentially earths something by connecting to this. I'm not certain. Either way, I'm going to connect it up. Well, that's been a bit of a longer but a very productive video tying up loose ends on this M52 swap, getting ready to start it. To recap what we did, we fitted our custom power steering lines from BM Conversions. Thanks again to Dan for those, and thanks for the custom routing. They couldn't be better, so I'm over the moon with those. We also got the brown temp sensor harvested from the M40 engine and fitted into the M52 block and wired in correctly. We got the throttle body heater lines capped off for now, and we got the heater matrix hoses hooked up, which seem to work quite well. We even got the fuel lines back in place and the fuel filter back where it belongs. And we tidied up a couple of oversights on the wiring that I'd made previously, so I'm feeling really quite happy with that. I'm running out of excuses now not to fit the intake manifold, and there's a bit of a sneak peek. This is what I've got. Now, those of you who are enthusiasts probably know what this is straight away, so make sure you stay tuned to see how that goes. Once I've got that intake manifold on, I think I'll be straight away trying to start the car and we can see if it runs for the first time, which is extremely exciting. So do make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on that. But thank you very much for watching.